Right, now can I welcome Clare Fitzsimmons, Newcastle University. Clare, over to you.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you to Mike. I'm going to unashamedly wade straight back into local at this point. Sorry. And big thanks to Sam for setting the context, I guess, so beautifully, because I had also chosen to kind of present a narrative, I guess, of the work that we've been doing at Newcastle with NIFCA, with North East NIFCA, with Natural England over the last kind of, longer than I care to admit, let's put it that way. And it's not just me, I'm the one that's talking, but actually this is the cast of thousands of bloody-minded individuals in the IFCAs, in Natural England, students, staff at Newcastle University and other collaborators that have really been, I guess, kind of struggling with the little questions in the district. And it's about how we form partnerships to collect that evidence to support management, I hope. So I'm going to chat a little bit about the work at Newcastle that led up to being able, hopefully, to contribute to the English Blue Belt. Talk a bit about partnership development, give you some case studies that I hope are relevant to MPAs of research work that we've done, and then talk very briefly about kind of strategies for effective working that, as Sam says, does basically boil down to being pretty tenacious and bloody-minded. So it's nice to see somebody else mention sea fisheries committees, because I think at Newcastle we hopefully have a good reputation for kind of work around MPAs in general. And that was started a long time ago. A colleague of mine, Nicholas Palunin, has quite a good reputation for working in the tropics. And coming back kind of into the UK, getting PhD students engaged with some of the questions as this MCZ process, protected areas in more temperate waters, is really kind of getting off the ground. We built up a really significant, we hope, body of work, working with the sea fisheries committees. So it's some excellent PhD students who not only looked at ecological science behind MPAs, so look at biodiversity, so methods for biodiversity assessment, methods for habitat assessment, methods for stock assessment, looking at the MPA effects on fish, but also taking it a step further, kind of back, I guess, in 2005-06, really looking at MPA effects on fishers, looking into the social science and management kind of on the ground, proper getting our hands dirty, chatting to a lot of people, looking at what was changing in the environment, what was really excluding people that had traditional rights to sort of fish these areas, and really trying to understand how we could deal with that over time. And then as that kind of research sort of moved into this environment that was so beautifully described earlier, where people are coming in with conservation remits that they've not had before, genuinely trying to kind of honestly grapple with some of the new obligations that exist, we hope that we kind of manage to fall in line with some of that thinking and provide some of the research to underpin those things. This was going to beautifully show the designations that we've got in place, but in Northumberland, it is kind of all of our inshore, pretty much. Alex and people that are here from Northumberland will give you more detail. But it's like really looking at that transition from fisheries focus to new inshore conservation obligations. And we're super enthusiastic. We've got a boat, like we've got students kind of all over the place. We've got methods, we've got techniques. We kind of love doing this stuff. I hate talking in front of large groups of people, but I love to be on boats and in the water and actually do my stuff. So we can really bring some of that, I think, to conservation. We also have Northumberland IFCA, again, super enthusiastic, have a boat, got a load of new equipment, kind of in the process of also gaining these conservation obligations. And I think the other thing that we had was a passionate lady in Natural England with vision called Catherine Scott, who really kind of pointed us in what we hope was the right direction. She's going to hate me for having photos of her. I actually had to raid Instagram to get them. Please don't tell her, just checking she's not actually in the audience. But I think just with a very small amount of funding early on, can people hear me if I kind of shout and move over here as well? A couple of very early studies that were unashamedly almost fisheries obligation type studies. We looked at lobster, we looked at crab, and then that was a £10,000 pop, and from there we really start to kind of build our knowledge of the area. So we didn't just look at the fisheries, we looked at the fishers, we looked at how the plotting techniques were affecting the marine environment. We moved on to understand that, kind of moving over habitats as well. So we were really trying to understand how both the animals and the people use the habitats. And as the fishing turned into activities, we tried to build research that sort of provided a groundswell there as well. So basically, quite a lot of research over quite a short amount of time, well, quite a long amount of time now, that really tried to bring together IFCA members, Newcastle University staff and students, Natural England marine advisors, because we all had research questions in common. The IFCAs had the fisheries data and knowledge, they had equipment, they had vessel. Natural England had kind of funding and knowledge and expertise and that will to kind of corral us in a more structured sort of project direction. Whereas we had research questions, and actually we have cheap manpower in the form of students that come through every year. We have a position where we can apply for funding. We have a research vessel, and we have kind of scientific resources, so we have access to good literature. We had a lot of things that we could bring to the party. And a big thank you to Alex and Natalie from Northumberland IFCA for this slide, actually, because that was Alex and Natalie's words, not mine. And I can sort of say those things, but it doesn't have the weight that it has when actually, I don't know, we have our luxury of our ivory towers, but to hear the IFCAs say that those things are important to them as well really mattered to me. So thank you, Alex. And I think the research that we've all done together has boiled down to kind of three things. We did start off wanting to understand the fisheries in terms of the animals. Where were the habitats? Where were the animals going? Where were they moving to? We also wanted to understand the people, so developing kind of spatial techniques for using sightings data to map out fishing effort over many years now across the district. Super, super helpful. So we can build up ideas of sort of temporal trends and kind of landings and trapping effort. And then feeding all of those things, kind of taking them forward as a body of work so that we can achieve more in the longer term. We also need to understand the habitats. So you know that these things are spatially designated around features. So without knowing what we have and where we have, we can do nothing. But it's the combination of those three things, I think, that come together that have allowed us to build up. Like what we believe, just in our little way in Northumberland, is quite special. So, just mentioned before, not without my own horrendogram mic, this kind of transition between doing the pure fisheries work through looking at people and habitats in the field, and then still keeping on going with a lot of the lobster work, but moving from those species to activities and less recognised activities, I guess, in the marine environment. The small amounts of funding that were put in initially actually have led into quite large bodies of funding. So we have probably the better part of £500,000 at the moment to look into things like indicators. I've called them MSFD here, but they're clearly not going to be. To look at mapping out recreational activities as well as more traditional fishing activities. To look at novel platforms and tools and techniques like drones and satellites, and to try and assess the extent that they can be useful to monitoring obligations that are now in place. And it's not just Natural England and NIFCA, it is North Eastern as well. EMFF have given us a lot of money. We work with the MMO, with CFAS, with the Environment Agency, with FERA now to deliver some of these things. And I hope you can tell that we actually love it. I love to be in that water, and I am passionate about getting these things done. I love to talk to our fishers as well, importantly. And I think that's quite nice in the area. So the project examples I picked to talk to you about very, very quickly. Project where we looked at the impacts of potting on rocky reefs. Project where we looked at intertidal collection of organisms, and that led on to recreational mapping project. And then this indicators project that we started for MSFD. So as Sam kindly said, the red risks were pretty pressing at one point. But I think the advantage of having kind of Catherine and Natural England on our side was that she kept our target in the research way sort of further ahead to look at some of the amber risks that were out there at the time when DEFRA changed their approach to fisheries management. So in terms of trawling, people kind of knew what the evidence was, but actually what was potting doing, specifically in an environment like Northumberland, is actually quite highly modified by centuries of fishing anyway. We had a PhD student called Fabrice Stevenson who conducted his 3 years worth of research on this exact question. And I think in terms of IFCA benefiting, and again, this is Alex and Natalie's words, not necessarily mine, it did increase their understanding of the pot fishery, and the findings were able to feed directly into the habitat regulations assessment that IFCA was conducting. We did do experimental work, so you'll see a pattern emerging in quite a lot of these slides. We do experimental work locally. We try to understand effect across gradient, so we know that nowhere in our district is unmodified, so we try and look at low, medium and high impact areas. We conduct some experiments and then we try and model out to cover a greater proportion of the district. So by combining broad-scale habitat maps that we had, fishing effort maps that we were able to collate from NIFCA sightings, and some experimental work, we were able to provide quite a comprehensive look at that, we hope. Moving on again, actually, intertidally, organisms were rumoured to be collected quite extensively in Northumberland. So people taking lugworms, digging for bait, people removing periwinkles for food and possibly kind of black market sales. So could we find out anything about that? So I think, again, we had a PhD student for 3 years look at if she could quantify the scale, intensity and potential impacts of those types of collections in the district. And again, kind of increasing understanding of that type of fishery, feeding directly, hopefully now, into assessments that NIFCA are conducting, looking at specifically bait digging and hand gathering, that certainly was quite far away from the remit of the original sort of fisheries, sea fisheries committees. Same method, gradient shores, low, medium, high impacted shores anyway. We conducted some experiments, and then we tried to understand what that ecological impact would look like from very local experiments when we amplify that sort of district scale. We know that they do have some impacts locally, less on the target species than on associated communities, but actually we found that recovery was quite quick. We were able to take that forward, inform some of spatial models that we were making that were looking at suitability, sensitivity and vulnerability, so that we could take a broader look down the shore. So creating evidence to populate the models so that we could look at areas that IFCA might want to target in terms of their management. So we can't afford to collect data for the whole of the European marine site near us, Berwick and Northumberland coast, but we can conduct the specific studies and try and look at data across the area. So that's 2 forms that were delivered by PhD. We received the year before last a grant from the European Maritime Fisheries Fund to look at creating novel indicators. So under the Marine Strategy Framework Directive, this quest for good environmental status, like could we do it? Can we actually measure it? How good are our metrics in the first place? So they were very kind and gave us quite a lot of money to look at indicators for both subtidal rock and mud indicators for monitoring in the North Sea. In terms of benefit to the IFCAs, we were developing specific regional indicators of good environmental status for our district. Unashamedly parochial, sorry Mike. Hopefully we'll feed into NIFCA's monitoring control plans, and they thought it was good survey experience for the officers as well. From our perspective, again, we've got the kind of same model going on. So we've got trawling, and we know where the trawling occurs. We've tried to get high, medium and low intensity of trawling to sample across that gradient on the mud sites. Novel techniques that we were trialling in this respect were eDNA samples and sediment profile imaging. They're actually quite beautiful sediment profile images in real life. They're just not shown up very well on the picture. At the bottom, we know where potting occurs, we know where the high, medium, low potting areas are, and we were able to deploy both towed and baited video across rocky sites in the district as well. Hopefully trying to develop some new indicators. So they're the 3 projects, and I think one of the other things that I wanted to highlight was once you have the data for these things, there are some quick wins available to the IFCAs. So I think once we had the habitat map that we produced for DEFRA from Coke St Mary's MCZ, it's quite a quick job to overlay on an annual basis where the trawling actually occurs. And I believe, again, Alex hopefully will back me up on this one, that that's been quite useful to IFCA at the moment. So they're trying to introduce a gear modification bylaw that's currently in consultation at the moment, I believe.
1 minute.
Because we know that actually trawling is occurring on rocky ground still. Similarly with scallop dredging as well. And again, it's nice because you're able to stand there honestly and report that there are mutual benefits for this work. IFCA get methods and experience, Natural England get information for condition assessments, and we get research impact, we hope, and future research publications. Back to the bloody mindedness for my last minute. So we did need an engaged partnership that has a core committed team with a long-term plan. We needed to keep building that knowledge base as we went through. We still needed to be quite innovative and generate ideas. Finance sort of got in the way sometimes, as I'm sure you can imagine. But relatively speaking, like, we're moderately cost effective in terms of delivery because we do have access to student bodies that want experience as well. And we were able to achieve multiple objectives for partners. Happy days. So in terms of future stuff,
Time's up.
yeah, teaser on future work, amplifying the impact work across activities and playing a lot with drones, we hope. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Claire. Any questions or points to Claire? Or any of... Oh, sorry, Lady Blue.
Hello. It's Sue Ware here from CFAS. Just a quick question in relation to some of the work that you've been doing around some of the shellfish populations and population dynamics. We're working at the moment on various projects looking at how we might rearrange ourselves following EU exit around how we do some of our fisheries monitoring. And there's going to be some real opportunity there to perhaps reprioritise or repurpose some of our efforts to some of these higher or equally high priorities around non-quota species and data-limited species and stocks, of which shellfish kind of comprise. So the sort of question is, in relation to those exercises, those R&D projects that you've been working on, have they actually fed back into sort of tangible improvements in the assessments for those specific fisheries?
So there have been some interesting outcomes, I think, for local fisheries. So stock assessment per se, I don't necessarily think that we have managed to improve stock assessment. We had a number of collaborative projects with Mike Smith, was the supervisor at CFAS, trying to look at kind of aging crab, and that technique wasn't necessarily the most viable that we ever encountered. A lot of the telemetry work, I think, shows promise in terms of understanding numbers of animals over habitat and actually making that locally more accurate, so we can understand that when we're protecting features, how we are protecting or not protecting the stock. I think probably one of the most influential things that we've done with regard to shellfish is to understand that fishery and the behaviour of the fishers. Daft thing, so we, as part of Fabrice's PhD, one of his chapters was looking at kind of decision to fish, like who, where, why, how. And I think he, as part of that, so IFCA introduced a pot limitation partway through that piece of work. And Fabrice's work sort of showed that people were scared of the pot limitation, and, you know, people standardly fishing sort of 200, 350 pots, then tooled up immediately to the 800 pots that was now the limitation. So you kind of like look at some of those unintended consequences of the work that you're doing, and I think sometimes that social element has been the most impactful, I guess. Sorry if that's a bit of a meander around your answer, but that would... No,
that's useful. I mean, a sort of second part to the question was going to be how would improvements in stock assessments and therefore, you know, improvement in management decisions actually go down with the fishers themselves, you know?
We have a really...
You could be brief on that one.
We have a really interesting body of fishers in Northumberland, I think. They are an ageing population, probably. People are wanting to exit the fishery, Alex will correct me. And they work with us quite well as it stands at the moment. I'll leave the rest of that to a coffee question, if I may. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, Claire.